Do I care more about one person or 1 million people? I watched this great but really sad movie the other day, one where the main character, who was a child, ended up dying from malnutrition. Fictional character, emotionally devastating movie. So with that feeling came a little bit of guilt. I'm fully aware that malnutrition affects millions of people across the world. Many children die from it. Yet I don't walk around day to day carrying this same level of grief that I felt towards this fictional character in this story. It got me thinking that empathy is often what drives us to care about problems. Using your past experiences as a lens to at least imagine or try to imagine how someone else is feeling is no doubt worthwhile. Taking care of those closest to us is self-evidently important, and I certainly don't think we should do that any less. The problem with empathy that I see, though, is that it works really well at the level of individuals. But the moment we start looking at statistics, populations, something changes. For example, 2 million children died from malnutrition in a recent year, which I think when we read that or hear about it, we feel somewhat sad. But what if I told you I actually just lied now? It's not 2 million died, it's actually 2.4 million children died of malnutrition in 2021. Does that feel emotionally distinct? It's an extra 400,000 people, real people. But the way our brains work, we just can't. We can't distinguish that. The numbers are just too high. It feels like a drop in the ocean. For whatever reason, when our brain hears about statistics and populations, things end up becoming too murky and abstract for our brains to properly get that same level of emotional resonance. And that's even with problems that are, urgent and dire. I'm sure there's so many reasons why our brain works that way, and those mechanisms will serve us in different sort of situations. But I think for the purpose of today, I'd argue that the absence of emotion doesn't make those problems in the world less urgent. Some problems are just too important to ignore simply because our brain can't process them from a more emotional perspective. So with our natural empathy, the thing that often drives us towards charitable and helpful actions, if that starts to wane as the scale increases, it almost feels like the opposite to how it should be. The most urgent issues, the thing that affects the most people, should be the thing that we prioritize, but our brain just isn't wired that way. And because of that, I would argue that when dealing with these big problems, empathy is not enough to rely on. I would actually argue that action in the absence of empathy is often needed when it comes to these large-scale problems. One example of this is how we go about picking charities to donate to when we decide to donate. We often donate to causes that personally resonate with us, that have some significance, whether it's someone we know or ourselves having a history with a disease or a certain type of problem. I don't want to discredit this, as I think there is immense value in this, and that instinct is so understandable, and I would hesitate to say we should lose that. But we also need to balance this with the effectiveness of certain charities and a more pragmatic approach. But the problem is the effectiveness of charities exists on a pretty wide spectrum. Some improve, save lives so much more effectively than others, and we need to make sure that we're picking charities that are proven to actually have a benefit, or at least the evidence pointing towards they will have a benefit. So I think there's a middle ground. Empathy is such an important point for charitable giving in terms of motivating people to donate, but I think we also need to have this more cold, kind of pragmatic and logical side that helps us distinguish between charities and pick ones that do have that effect that's been proven and properly studied. Otherwise, we're just throwing money into the wind and we don't even know what the effect is. And I think by finding that middle ground between empathy and the more cold, logical side, by finding that place, we can make sure that our help goes as far as it possibly can. So as you may have seen in the previous videos, we're doing a regular donation to an effective charity. Right now, we're doing the Against Malaria Foundation, just doing a portion of my income to them regularly. So I won't recap too much of it, but AMF is one of the most effective charities out there. Every $6 provided will send a bed net to an affected country, to an affected family, and it prevents malaria transmission. It's calculated that by about every $5,500 given, a life will be saved. That's very abstract sounding, but that's what the statistics show us from an external charity evaluator, GiveWell. So we'll do another $120 this week, and we might change that in the coming videos. And by being public about it, my goal is to hopefully normalize charitable giving a bit more. And that's acknowledging, I'm very lucky. I'm living in a first world country and have a full-time job. So that makes it very possible for me. But I think it's worth thinking about for yourself as well. Is this something that I could do? And I think we underestimate how capable we are of doing something like this. So I'd encourage anyone watching to also consider doing the same if it works for your situation, of course. I think sometimes charitable giving is almost paradoxically looked down upon. You know, what's your angle? Are you posing? Things like that. But I think it's that ignores the real problem of what's actually happening in the world and these things that are preventable. I think that should be our focus. And, you know, I'd much rather charitable giving is not seen as this morally, you know, particularly moral action to do. I'd much rather it's seen as a normal thing that anyone in a particularly, you know, in a first world country with a stable job should be thinking about this. I think it is really important, and it's not seen as urgent as I think it should be with the amount of problems that the world has and the amount of solutions as well that are out there. So that's my angle with this channel, if you're wondering, and it seems a bit weird. Yeah, I think that's it. See you in the next video.